I serve as the chief rights attorney. And part of my role is legislative and policy advocacy for the division. And so I just want to talk for a moment about the Olmstead decision. Olmstead is perhaps the single most important piece of law interpreting the ADA that we've had since the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in 1990. In the Olmstead decision, Justice Ginsburg, ruling for the majority, held that states are required to provide services to people in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. And since that time, Olmstead has applied not only to persons who are institutionalized, but also to those who are at risk of being institutionalized. And more recently, it's been interpreted and expanded to include preventing, to apply to those who are prevented from meaningful participation in their communities because of the services or practices of the state. Next slide. And by way of background, for those who have not read the decision, I'm happy to provide a copy to anyone, but the Olmstead case was about two women living in Georgia. They had mental health diagnoses and intellectual disabilities. They were institutionalized. Both women sought to live in the community, and their providers indicated that they were appropriate to live in the community. However, the state of Georgia indicated they did not have the services and supports available such that they could live in the community. And the legal aid provider in Georgia filed suit under the ADA, and the case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And it's really a tremendous story. I know there's been movies made about it, and there's a lot of resources online. So if you're interested in learning more, reach out to me and I can provide some of that to you as well. But because of this case, we finally had the first decision that interpreted the Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, the decision held that the state has an obligation under the ADA to reasonably modify its services and provide the most integrated setting appropriate. And so specifically, when we talk about the Olmstead decision, Justice Ginsburg came up with this idea of Olmstead plans. And she said, if the state demonstrates that it has a comprehensive, effectively working plan, then the state would meet its obligations to show that we're providing reasonable modifications for people to meet the public services portion of the ADA. And so what that means is the state has an obligation to reasonably modify its services, but in some situations, services would fundamentally alter the state's service delivery. And the state doesn't have to fundamentally alter the service delivery. The plan of services for the state has to look at the group as a whole. And so it's a balance, right? And that's what the decision recognizes. And that's why an effectively working Olmstead plan is so important. And that's why, next slide. Oh, that's why we need an Olmstead plan in order to make sure that we are adhering to the decision. The Department of Justice has given us some guidance. The quote that I gave you is really all that's mentioned in the actual case about the plan. And so a lot of what we have learned about developing an Olmstead plan has come from the Department of Justice, looking at other states, and looking at Olmstead litigation since the landmark decision in 1990. I think this definition by the Department of Justice is the best statement I've seen of what an integrated setting looks like. It's about opportunity, equal opportunity for participation and access. Next slide. So that's Olmstead in a nutshell, and I'll be happy to turn it over, I think, back to Dina. But if you have questions on the Olmstead decision itself or want more information, again, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share those resources. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This is Dina Schmidt. And so talking about the Olmstead decision and ADSD and implementation plans for Olmstead here in Nevada. Next slide. So as you all know, the Olmstead decision impacts multiple divisions within our department, which is the Health and Human Services Department. Not only are we at Aging and Disability Services impacted, but the Division of Child and Family Services, who provide mental health services for children, the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy, who finance many of the home and community-based services within Nevada, but also the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, who provide adult mental health programs across our state. Next slide. So really, we wanted to talk a little bit about within ADSD, who is impacted by the Olmstead decision. So as many of you already know, the following populations are really the focus of ADSD, and those are individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities, individuals with physical disabilities, and older adults. And I just want to clarify and make clear that in the first two groups include children. We do provide services to children and adults with physical disabilities and intellectual and developmental disabilities. And one we didn't list here as a direct population that we serve, but I think is worth noting is the caretakers. We do support caretakers across the lifespan through various services, which is an indirect service to those people that we serve. So the next slide, we're going to walk through many of the services that are provided to these populations. Developmental services are really services that are aimed at supporting people in achieving their goals of independence and providing community participation. You can see here a list of various services that are provided through our developmental services programs. These services are available to waiver recipients as well as non-waiver recipients. They are funded with state general fund as well as Medicaid waiver funding. And of note here, just as we consider Olmstead and our planning, implementation, and the considerations, the things we need to consider as an agency and as a state, just for everybody's awareness, children receiving services under developmental services, the state share of those services are funded through the counties. So the counties are a very important stakeholder as we talk about this set of services. Next slide. So individuals with physical disabilities, really these are also services that are really focused at keeping people in their homes or community of choice and providing services that avoid placement in long-term care facilities. We provide home and community-based services through the physically disabled waiver, and you can see here the list of various services that are available. Individuals must meet eligibility criteria for all of our services, as many of you know. Those eligibility criteria can vary, but there are income limitations for each of our programs, as well as risk of institutionalization. Really, they have to have be at risk of institutionalization to meet many of our programs. The next slide talks about those services available to older adults, which is our home and community-based service for the frail elderly. And these are the services currently provided within that waiver. And then you see here, there are some additional services provided to older adults with other funding sources, including state general fund. For community options, okay, let me go through these real quick and then I'll get to your question, Diane. The community options program for the elderly, senior support services. We have several senior nutrition services that are funded through general fund, but mostly through Older Americans Act funds. Those include home delivered meals as well as congregate settings. And then the National Family Caregiver Supports, we have some grant funding that provides supports to caregivers. And I did see there was a quick question about the funding for the children who receive developmental services. So any child who receives developmental services, the state share, which is, it's a Medicaid match program. And so the state's cost of those services is billed directly to the county that that child resides in. And that is an NRS that says the counties are responsible for the care and services to children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So next slide. Hopefully that, oh, good. Okay. So within ADSD, we also have a variety of other programs that probably aren't normally as well known, but are worth mentioning because a lot of them provide social supports and additional supports to individuals who may be at risk of institutionalization. These can include our pharmacy assistance program, the Senior and Disability RX program, which currently provides a subsidy to those individuals on Medicare Part D. Though we are looking at options and we'll be discussing during this planning process of how to expand that program to support more people with the cost of their prescriptions. We also provide independent living programs, personal assistance services. We have the assistive technology for independent living programs that provides adaptive technology and equipment to support independent living. We have our aging and disability resource centers, which are really focused on trying to help people navigate the long-term and support services system, how to understand their options and make informed decisions about their care and plan for their future care. We also have the communication access services. And I realized we didn't mention early intervention services on this slide, as well as the autism treatment assistance program. Those two are focused on children, but those services are very important to try to address children's needs early as possible and support them in becoming integrated into their communities. Next slide. So, oh, I'll give it a second. I see our interpreter.
We're good. We switched interpreters.
Okay. Oh, okay. I just can't see her on my screen, so I thought she was gone. Okay. So in accordance with the Olmstead decision, really, as Jennifer Richards had mentioned, really it's individuals who are eligible for services under the Americans with Disability Act. But for us, really our focus is on a different part of the sentence, which is unnecessarily institutionalized or at risk of unnecessary institutionalization. For us, those are the two most important things that we are trying to avoid when we're looking at our service system, to make sure that people have access to the services they need to keep them from going into an institution or from unnecessarily being in an institution, or supporting them in getting out of institutions if that's where they are currently residing and have a desire to get out and move back into their community. So really, as we start to talk about ADSD's Olmstead plan and how we're going to serve the people, we're really trying to focus on those services provided by ADSD so that we can be accountable as an agency to all of you on what we're doing to ensure the service delivery system is there and the support services. You'll hear more later about the details about how we intend to do that later in the presentation. But just really wanted to let everybody know that we are focused on unnecessarily institutionalized, regardless of a diagnosis. We just want to make sure that people have the opportunity to stay in their communities where they choose to live and reside, and have access to the communities that they live and reside in as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Frischman to talk about our previous Olmstead plan.
Hi, good afternoon. Jennifer Frischman with Aging and Disability Services. Many of you know who I am, but I am the Quality Assurance Manager for Aging and Disability Services. So I'm excited to see you all here today and talk about where we were, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. So next slide, please. So if we talk about, excuse me, our last Olmstead plan that was developed in 2016, we've made some progress, and I'll just go high level over it, and you can kind of read the slide for yourself as well. But Olmstead truly does, it's at the core of how we build our budgets for each legislative session. We refer to the Olmstead decision when providing justification for our budgets. So that focuses on wait lists, expanding services. Sometimes it's even increasing rates to enhance providers to provide services within our communities. So that really is at the core of how we build our budgets. We've also developed Nevada Care Connection. As many of you know, we had a pandemic earlier in 2020, and Nevada Care Connection was it was born prior to that, but really provided a lot of services and resources for individuals that were perhaps experiencing some crisis. And again, like it says, help make informed choices, navigate services and programs, find additional resources, things like that. And again, the goal is to prevent or delay the institutionalization of individuals and have them remain in their community for as long as possible. We also have Money Follows the Person, or as sometimes it's referred to as MFP, and that's really assisting folks that are in a facility to transfer out into the community. And so it can help set up things like first and last month's rent, a security deposit. For those folks that have been institutionalized for a while, they might not have dishes or a bed or just basic things that you need to remain out in the community. So the Money Follows the Person funds can help with that as well. And then we have BIP, which is our Balancing Incentives Program. And that was a 5-year project. I can't remember exactly when it started, but it was during the 2016 Olmstead plan. And that project helped to rebalance the Medicaid spending and really focus more on the home and community-based spending rather than the institutional spending. Next slide, please. As Dina kind of touched on, we'd really like to focus this Olmstead plan on things that ADSD can control and have influence over. And as she said, you know, we've learned some things since our previous Olmstead plan. And so in a lot of ways, our previous Olmstead plan really had things that were beyond the scope of ADSD. And it required coordination and funding and cooperation between other divisions and other departments. We didn't really have anybody with the lead on that. And we didn't have anybody within ADSD that had the authority to enforce those other agencies and departments to make changes. So we're learning from that lesson now. We established goals and objectives that required funding that was not available or wasn't sustainable. So we might have gotten some one-time funds for it, and then nothing got funded previously or after that. So, and then required accountability activities and data sharing efforts that the system is not structured to support. So I think in our previous plan, we might have made some promises that we just couldn't implement effectively. So we've learned that we're not going to do that again. So next slide, please. And again, lessons learned that will be applied to our current plan and ongoing. So as I said, we're going to address things that ADSD can implement. And we're going to ensure accountability in that framework that will measure progress on an annual basis. And also, we're going to include a goal to work towards a unified plan across other state divisions and departments and have those lines clearly delineated as to who is doing what, who's responsible, and kind of what the expectations for other divisions and departments are. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that. So while Isabel spotlights me, I will introduce myself. My name is Lisa Watson, and I am a client services manager at Social Entrepreneurs. Social Entrepreneurs has been contracted to support the planning process with ADSD. We have been working with the state for decades and have actually completed a lot of plans throughout the state departments that are impacted by Olmstead. So this is kind of like in our backyard and in our wheelhouse. Now, having said that, we are process experts. We are not subject matter experts. And so what that means is that we have put together, in coordination with ADSD, a steering committee that is made up of experts, either by way of their skills, experiences, or their lived experiences. And so we have a steering committee that is really driving all elements of our planning process that will take us through almost the end of the year. I believe that we have a timeframe that has this plan being completed by October of 2023. So I'm just going to provide a really high overview of what that process looks like, and then share with you guys some opportunities for community engagement and input, because in working with ADSD, they were very, very clear about wanting everyone to have access to providing input into what this new plan will look like for the state. Okay, so really we have three objectives that we want to do throughout this planning process. The first one, and these are very aligned with what actually the Olmstead decision requires of Olmstead plans. So this is really rooted in the Olmstead decision itself and the framework that it has offered. So the first requirement is that we understand what is our current reality. Like, what does the state service system look like? How many people are being served? How many people have been moved out of institutions into community-based settings? And what are some of the strengths of the system? What are some of the barriers in the system? So we have already begun collecting that kind of information from Jennifer and her teammates over at ADSD. We are also taking into consideration a survey that was actually done through UNR that had over 200 responses, and many of them being folks with lived experience. So we will be combining those two elements of the data with a community engagement process, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that offers you guys some additional opportunities to provide input. All of that will kind of roll up into what hopefully will become a very crystal clear understanding of what our current reality is. From there, then we start to think about what is our preferred reality, right? And that's where we start to craft a plan for the future that's very responsive to what the most critical issues are that we identified throughout that first process of data gathering and understanding what the current system looks like. So we will be putting together that plan in terms of like actionable steps. We're going to use the SMARTY framework, which our goals and objectives will be SMART, measurable, actionable, time specific. It will include integration as well as equity within our framework. So we will do that. We will set forth a plan. And then the last component is that we will set the division up, or I'm sorry, the department up for success, ADSD specifically. So I think that this was talked about earlier in terms of a lesson learned. We want to make sure that there's an accountability framework so that ADSD can take a look at what it's done and measure against kind of what they had established and what they've actually achieved, and communicate that back to the impacted communities. This plan is meant to be a living document which means that as circumstances change and our conditions change, so should the plan change. And so we're hopeful that in establishing this framework that we can position them for success through every year of its implementation. Okay, so how are we going to do all of that? So we have structured this to this planning process to be in kind of 3 major phases. And so the project itself was launched in November, and we just used that time through the end of January to really kind of get organized and get really prepared for the planning itself. So we gathered some initial data. We established what is a core team within ADSD with all of the folks who will be responsible for implementing the plan. They helped to inform who would be on that steering committee that I referred to. And then we are planning this study session. We thought the study session was an important way to kind of get everybody on the same page with a shared understanding of what is the Olmstead decision, how does it impact Nevada, and what does this planning process look like? So this was actually an adjustment that was made as a result of our very first steering committee kickoff meeting, in which questions were raised by your steering committee. And so we thought, well, this is exactly what we asked them to do. They gave us some information, and so we responded, reacted, and then adjusted our approach to incorporate this study session with the hopes that everyone kind of starts with the same information and the same understanding of what this looks like. So then the second part of our project really is about understanding what the current needs and the current environment looks like. So like I had mentioned, we have taken a look at some of the initial data that's come from the state. We've taken a look at the survey results that UNR had created. And this is all available on a webpage, which I will share with you guys momentarily. And we will be also incorporating additional data. So we are going to be doing some consumer workshops, and we are going to be doing some interviews with key persons to really understand both what are the systems issues and then what are the experiences of folks who are impacted by the Olmstead decision. So as a result of all that data gathering, we really hope to identify what are the most critical issues that we need to address and make changes within the system for. And then the last section is really about developing that plan. So as I had mentioned, we will develop specific goals and objectives. We'll establish an accountability framework that has an annual review, adjustments, and a report out to all of the key persons involved. We will draft a comprehensive strategic plan document. And the way that we operate when we create a plan like this is that we do it in a very iterative fashion so that folks can take a look at what we're developing as we're going along. So on the webpage that we're posting all of our information on, you'll actually get to see the strategic plan as it's being built. You'll get the opportunity to provide input throughout the process and not just when the plan is finalized. Now, having said that, the very final component after we put the plan together will be receiving public comment on the plan in its entirety. So we will solicit community feedback, and then we will take that back to our steering committee to really finalize the Olmstead plan. Okay. So staying engaged in the process. One of the things that ADSD was really clear on is that they wanted to make sure that this process was, one, transparent, and two, engaging to all of the people who have a stake in this work. And so we have established a couple of different ways for folks to be engaged in the process. As I mentioned, we will be hosting 8 workshops, consumer workshops, and we will be doing these in Vegas, 2 in Vegas, 2 in Washoe County, and 4 in the rural areas of the state. We expect that at least one of those 4 will probably be in Elko, but the steering committee will actually take that up in our January steering committee meeting. So keep an eye out, because in the same way that you guys registered for this, we will be sending out a flyer and an invitation to participate in some of those consumer workshops. We expect that those consumer workshops will happen in February. We've established a webpage. And the web page is actually on the bottom of the fact sheet that most of you should have received in advance of this meeting this morning. It's also been posted in the chat. But the web page actually shows not only who the steering committee is. We are posting all of our steering committee meeting materials, as well as the minutes, the recordings, and the status reports that we will be developing for each steering committee member at the conclusion of each steering committee moving forward. So we really are relying upon our steering committee members to be the voice of their constituency, to take the information back to their constituency between each steering committee meeting, and to receive feedback and help to communicate that to us. That's just one mechanism, right? But there's also on that webpage a mechanism for you guys to actually provide input at any given time based on your needs and what your thoughts are about the process. So with that, I actually just want to show you guys really quickly, since we have a little bit of time, what that website looks like. So on the bottom of the fact sheet is actually a link to the web page that's hosting all of the Olmstead ADSD Olmstead planning process. And Marika, if you wouldn't mind dropping the link into the chat so that folks can access this in their leisure. But you'll see here it has just a brief background about what the Olmstead plan is, what we're doing, members of the steering committee, how to stay informed about the process. So this is actually, we had our first steering committee meeting in November, and each one of these bullets underneath that designation is the document that you can access. So I'm just going to do this so you can see, you can access all of these materials whenever you like. We will be posting, so our next steering committee meeting is on January 18th. As soon as that steering committee takes place, that will actually move to the left side of the column on this page, and then we will post all of the meeting documents, meeting recordings, transcripts, and things of that nature. And then this is the area where I told you at any time, members of the public can offer us input into the process. So we're actually going to ask you guys if you have any questions that have been generated based on the information you heard today, to test this for us. We have to see if this actually works. So if you have any questions about the information that was shared with you today, I would invite you, click onto that link, because it looks like you'll have a little bit of time after the study session ends, because I think it's not going to take us till 3 o'clock, to go in there and just shoot us a question. And we will respond and post all of the questions in a sort of frequently asked question format on the webpage on at least a monthly basis. So with that, I would just open it up to the floor if there's any questions about the planning process itself.
Lisa, I can see that Barry Gold has his hand raised.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do have a question, and I apologize if I missed this. I was, of course, multitasking during a Zoom meeting like many of us do, but this seems to be the ADSD Olmstead process. And I'm just wondering, in the past, the Olmstead plan was department-wide, not division-specific. So I'm just curious, will Medicaid and will all the other divisions be doing a separate Olmstead plan? How is that going to work, since ADSD is doing one within their guidelines? How is it going to be department wide?
So I would ask who from the state would like to answer Mr. Gold's question.
Hi, Barry, it's Dina.
Hey, Dina.
So thank you for the question, and I appreciate it. This is an area that's been difficult for us to kind of decide how we can balance this. So as some of you know and have participated, but others may not be aware, the Division of Public and Behavioral Health has their own Olmstead plan. They have a community behavioral health integration plan. where they are focused on their service system and how to support individuals with mental illness in integrating them into the community. And so really we are doing the same. And as Jennifer Richards mentioned earlier, our goal eventually, and part of, I think, one of the goals of this plan will have is how do we create a department-wide integration plan, right? So that we get everybody on board. And what is the role of advocacy in our Olmstead plan? Because I think what happens is the previous Olmstead plan, while it said it was a department, it was really done by ADSD and owned by ADSD. And so we weren't able to implement a lot of the activities within there because there wasn't ownership across the department. So we are really focused this time on what we can impact. But that does not mean that we won't identify opportunities in our plan where advocacy roles. We have multiple commissions and boards that provide advocacy across the state that I think play a role in that, in ensuring that others are aware of what the needs are out there. For example, I'll just give you an example in the last plan, something around transportation. That is so outside of we have a very small piece of transportation. What we can do within our agency is so small, it doesn't impact the larger system. And so really trying to get all of our advocacy bodies to help the department and other agencies, not just our department, other divisions and departments, to understand that we all have a role in this, is our plan within this. But we want to make sure that we're focused on what we can do so that we can show that we're making progress.
And will there be an oversight process to decide that the different plans overlap enough so that there's no gaps between them? Will that be done through the director's office, or how will the coordination of all the separate plans be made?
We haven't identified actually a official process for that. Each plan has an accountability process within it. And so we don't have an official way to identify that.
Please include the public in that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Lisa, if I could just tag on to what Dina is sharing, I would just note that as a tangible example, the Behavioral Health Community Integration Plan was just completed. The same framework for both that plan and ADSD's plan is the framework adopted by DHHS. So the framework is the same. That is one of the components that ensures that there is alignment, because they all fall under the same mission, vision, and guiding principles adopted by DHHS.
Thank you, Kelly.
And I'm not aware of any other planning process underway.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. And so we've got two folks with their hands up. Ms. Cindy Swanson.
Oh, the audio was muted.
Thank you very much.
Send us left the meeting.
Probably along, and it's point of disclosure, I'm on the steering committee, and I brought this up and as the previous questioner was getting at. I think we're at a point of really moving forward. We have a fabulous opportunity right now with what has been determined by the research. But what we see almost on a daily basis with what the Department of Justice is coming after towns, counties, cities, states for their violation of Olmstead. It's everywhere. And I was very excited to be part of the steering committee. I was disappointed that no one from education was on the steering committee. Nobody from DR was on the steering committee. I don't know what other divisions could be there. But it would seem to me for us as a state and as a division, a department, to get ahead of us and to have those people at the table, so that they can start hearing what's going on with the Olmstead plan. And I think it's a failed opportunity if we don't have those folks at the table. We know what we can't do, but we're going to continue to not know what we can do if those different departments aren't sitting with us. So and again, thank you for all the hard work you've done, but I think we've got enough research now to show us mistakes were made back in 2016 to jump ahead those errors and move forward. The state has a lot of issues with employment. People who are in schools don't know what they don't know. And it would seem to me, again, if those groups were involved in the steering, they would learn this and be able to push it back, forward and backward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. I can say this, that we do intend to
Oh my,
interview
and now look.
20 people who are considered key persons. And I expect that folks from both of the areas that you described will likely be on the list of people that we want to engage and understand kind of what their barriers, what their strengths are, so that we can be mindful of it. And I know that there's also been some discussion at the core team level to say, we also understand it's our responsibility to elevate issues that may be outside of our scope, but to be very specific about understanding what we can actually influence. Thank you, Cindy. Okay, we have a hand raised from Shar Frost. So Shar, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm on on the 2016 Olmstead plan. Beyond the scope of ADSD. I'm really curious because one of the big problems that families really, one of the barriers that families face is the fact that the agencies are also siloed. And so I'm curious why we wouldn't require cross coordination. I understand that you don't have any ability to require compliance with other divisions, but it seems to me that the director of HHS does have that ability. And then there was a piece in there, the goals and objectives that required funding that was not available through the legislature budget process. Isn't that always the case? Because we never know what 2 years from now is going to look like budget wise. And so given the fact that we've just recently had findings in a DOJ case here in the state that were not favorable, it seems to me that we should be, I'm just curious why we're not going to bat and really establishing goals and objectives and informing the legislature and the governor why this is necessary and important to fund.
I don't know if Dina, Jennifer, or Jennifer, which one of you would like to respond to? I believe I heard at least two questions in there.
Sorry.
This is Dina. So I'll respond to that one. And I think what we were trying to get at is that while we're not saying that funding obviously is always right. That's what our number one goal. And Olmstead decisions do currently drive our funding, right? Every year we say we have to address wait lists. We should not have wait lists for any of these services. I think what the slide was intended to display was maybe some of the goals were so specific that they were outside of what we could put in our budget. So I think what we're really just saying is as we develop the new goals and the new service sets, or that we're cognizant of a sustainability plan, right? We may I'm just going to make up an example. We decide we want a new service and we apply for a grant, but making sure that that our planning process through Olmstead is identifying long-term sustainable solutions, right? Not just short-term. Yes, we got the grant, we got it. So we can't mark the box on that if it's not sustainable. ARPA funding, for example, right? We have multiple amazing opportunities right now with our ARPA funds that we've been given. And for us, right, the number one question the legislature asked us is how are you going to sustain them? And so it is that cross coordination with Medicaid to make sure that those programs can be sustained within the Medicaid budget, not to develop things that we can only fund temporarily. And so I think it's more about the sustainability of those goals and objectives than it is, if that helps. I hope that makes sense. We really want to make sure that we're identifying very specific things that we know would address the service gaps, but with a sustainability plan behind them, not just go find funding for this, but how are we going to fund it?
Just want to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Gold was saying. This idea about the cross coordination and the separate plans, it's estimated that at least 40% of the IDD population also has a co-occurring mental health need. And so I just really would urge both that for this plan, as well as the plan that is on the mental health side, that there be some objective, that there will be collaboration between and kind of there's some crossover points in those plans. So I hope that we're looking at that and really trying to move towards one plan and not disability specific or agency specific. That's all. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shar. We have a hand up from Diane. Diane, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I put it in the chat, but I thought I would just raise my hand also. I'm wondering if it would be possible to invite Richard Whitley, if he remains as the head of DHHS, or if the new administration brings in somebody else, invite that person in that position to come talk at a steering committee meeting about the collaborative issue and what is the plan for managing, multi Olmstead plans across state divisions and departments.
This is Dina, and I'm happy to reach out to Richard and ask him that question and see what he's willing to do. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Dina. We did have a question in the chat around the difference between Olmstead and the community-based waivers. And so I'm just wondering if Jennifer R. is still on and might be able to describe the difference between those.
Jen, I can take this one for you if you'd like.
I'm still reading the question, but I think it's asking what's the difference between the decision and the federal settings rule that's being rolled out.
So, and I'm going to take a stab at it from one perspective, and Jen, if I get something wrong with the legal part, keep me honest and on the straight and narrow. So the Olmstead decision was a Supreme Court decision, whereas the home and community-based settings rule are governed by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So you'll hear it, it'll be HCBS, which is home and community-based settings, and it's the new rule. The new rule actually came out in 2014, but it does not become effective until March of 2023. We've got a lot of information actually on the DHCFP, Medicaid's website, and I'm happy to share that with Lisa, and maybe you can put a little something on the Olmstead website as well, because it does tie in very nicely. And basically the settings rule, the provisions set forth in that really aim to have people be as independent in their communities as possible. So it ties in very nicely with Olmstead. It kind of runs parallel. For instance, I'll give you an example. People have to be able to have visitors at any time, and the visitors of their choosing. So if they live in a provider-owned home, the provider can't say, I'm sorry, you can't have your friends or your family over between these certain hours. If you want them to come over, you can have them come over. You can have access to food anytime you want. Of course, there are some medical restrictions that sometimes come into play with that, but those are the types of things that the settings rule ensures, so that people have independence and autonomy. So hopefully that answers a little bit of your question.
This is Jennifer Richards. I'll just tag on that Olmstead decision has really paved the way for the settings rule. It's the broad rule of law, and the settings rule gets into a lot more specifics. And like Jennifer Frischman said, it's a federal regulation. It's in the CFRs. So it's about identifying specific instances of equality of opportunity and full integration in these settings. So who is responsible for, so they don't supersede each other. One's case law, one's a regulation. They're both the law of the land. The settings rule is a bit more specific. I hope that answers your question. If you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Our teams are very active in providing education and training on the deployment of the settings rule as we approach the go live date in March. And most of that work's already been done, I think. Yeah, Jennifer's nodding.
Jennifer, there's a note in the chat saying, thank you, that helps.
So there's a couple of questions in the chat that really have to do with like things that we may identify as actions to take within the plan, like part of the goals and objectives, specifically around financing. And so I'm gonna hold those and potentially include them in the question and answer section that we'll post on the website at a later date, because I really wanted to focus, the study session focus is really on the process and answering questions about the process. Are there any other questions from the participants around the process that we might be able to answer in the last 5 minutes here?
Okay, so there is a question in the chat, Kelly Marshall, by the way. If there are any efforts to include or invite legislators or other policymakers to listen in throughout the process.
This is Dina. We have not considered that, but if we do have a couple of legislative members on the Commission on Aging, and some of our other boards and commissions, and it would make sense for us to make sure that those legislators that are currently involved in our boards or commissions also participated in this, so we can certainly reach out to them and include them. It's a great suggestion.
There was also a question around the DPBH plan. And Kelly, I'm just thinking that because you were part of the process of developing that plan, having mentioned that it was just completed, if you want to take a run at answering that question.
Sure. So for anyone listening, the question was that the person typing asked or stated that they understood that DPBH had their own Olmstead plan, and they wonder how they developed that plan without considering crossover with the rest of the state as well. I will say that they did consider crossover with the rest of the state, and that each of the other divisions were represented in that planning process and informed that planning process. So there was extensive interviews with DHCFP to get the Medicaid piece, because that's the funding mechanism, right, for any of the strategies related to community integration, or many of the strategies is probably a better way of saying that, of the community integration plan. So I would note that they did consider that crossover, and we were really thrilled to have ADSD participating in that process as well, and they participated significantly.
Thank you, Kelly. That was helpful. I'm thinking it may also be helpful to just, when that plan is completed and public, we can post it on the ADSD Olmstead webpage as well.
Actually, it was completed on December 30th. And I would like to acknowledge the people, there are people on this call who participated in that planning. So they would have received a copy, but Lisa, I'll make sure that you get a copy to post. It has been published as of Tuesday.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. And then there's one last question that I want to make sure we don't miss. And I believe it was Diane who asked it. My chat has been going crazy, but is there any plans for DHCFP to develop an Olmstead plan themselves? And I don't know if anyone can speak to that on the call, but if somebody can, please do.
This is Dina, and I'll just take a stab. There's no, I am not aware of any particular effort. However, as Kelly just explained, right, each of us in our goals and objectives identify those goals and objectives that have to do with Medicaid, and Medicaid participates in the development of those goals and objectives so that we are all on the same page. And so, yes, they participate in all of our planning processes because we are the operational entities and they're the funder. So they don't have a particular plan because they're not a service delivery, they're just a funder technically. And so they're integrated into our planning processes.
Thank you, Dina. Okay, well, one last call for any final questions before we wrap this up. All right, well, with that, I will pass it on over to Dina to close it out.
So I just want to again say thank you to our partners at SEI. They are a phenomenal team, and just recognize that they have been working with the state for many years on Olmstead planning, and they are the planning experts. This is one area where they assist us through this process, because Olmstead planning is a large, as you guys have all the concerns you guys are bringing, right? It gets complicated, it gets complex. And so I just appreciate having them on board to help us walk through the process and model all of the efforts across the department in the same manner, so that we are moving forward together. It doesn't feel integrated, but I believe once we get through the process, you'll see that the way we're doing this.
Dina, you're on mute.
Am I? Mine's not on mute.
I can hear you, Dina.
I can hear you.
Okay. So I do think you'll see that the end goal is an integrated process. It doesn't feel like it when we sometimes, but I think ultimately when you see the model that SEI has used with public and behavioral health and with us, you'll see how it comes together very nicely in the end. I'm thrilled to see so many people participating. And I'm excited about having a website where we can continue to have participation at everybody's convenience. We will also put a link to that webpage on our homepage. So if you're having trouble finding it or you forget to copy it, it will also be under featured links, which is right on our adsd.nb.gov homepage. We will put a link on there. It'll be updated this evening. So you can get to that at any time there and share it with anybody you'd like to. So again, really, this plan is actually about, all of you. So we are here and thankful for your participation and input, and just excited about the steering committee's work and having such a variety of folks on that steering committee, I think, and reporting back to each of their commissions and boards, I think really is going to help drive this plan in a way that we possibly haven't done it before. So super excited about this opportunity. And I have to say, before I forget, thank you to CSPD for writing me a letter to remind me we needed to get this done and pushing us and doing their job as an advocacy group. So thank you. We often get tied up in the day-to-day and forget to do these things. So thank you. I appreciate your nudge. It was very, very well needed. So thank you again, Diane and team. So look forward to working with all of you as we move forward.